Welcome to Fabric Monday. Let's start this new year talking about file triggers and drop zones in Microsoft Fabric. What is this exactly? A drop zone is a feature that we need to build inside a medallion architecture. Some medallions architectures ignore a drop zone, they don't use drop zones and go directly to a bronze layer. Others need to use a drop zone. What exactly is a drop zone? When we are ingesting files, we need a place for these files to arrive. The place where these files arrive is the drop zone. And on that place, these files need to be processed. So we need to have some kind of trigger in the drop zone to trigger the processing of these files. For example, let's imagine the file area of the lakehouse. Then a file arrives in the file area of the lakehouse. We need a trigger that triggers the processing of this file. So we can have an activator. An activator is now capable to trigger an event based on a file in the files area of the lakehouse. And this is the great news I'm showing today. The activator will trigger a notebook. The notebook will process the file and then drop the result of the file to a lakehouse. That files area is what we call a drop zone. And some time ago, very recently, we could only do this using Azure Storage. Why? Because we had no way to trigger an event from a file, an upload of a file in a lakehouse. There was no way to do that. If we had to trigger an event, we had to use an Azure Blob Storage directly in Azure. Not anymore. Now we can trigger an event from a file in a lakehouse. Let's talk about the difference between a drop zone and the bronze layer. A drop zone receives files not processed yet. All the files arriving in the drop zone are files that have not been processed yet. If we try to mix files that are not processed yet and have already been processed, the idea is not so good. We may mix different things and we may have bad results. In the bronze layer is where we archive the files already processed, and usually the number of the files is huge. That's why the drop zone usually is one folder, it's only for the files arriving. And on the bronze layer we organize the files by date, for example, and other folder structure. To archive these files, the bronze layer is an archiving of these files, while the drop zone is only for the files to arrive and be processed and maybe be dropped into the bronze layer. The drop zone may only be needed if the input is in file format. If we are ingesting data in files, if we are receiving files, we may need a drop zone to process those files. If we are ingesting in different formats, we may not need a drop zone. For example, let's say that we are ingesting from Azure SQL. We can be using a Dataflow Gen 2, we can be using a notebook, it doesn't matter. Do we need to save this in files format in the files area of a lakehouse? Not necessarily. We can directly save them as tables. In this case, a drop zone may not be needed. The bronze layer, on the other hand, it will be always present in a lakehouse structure, and it may have different formats depending on the format that we are receiving, because we try to keep the data in the closest format possible as the format we receive it. That's one more reason to have the drop zone. If we receive the information in file format, we keep the files we receive. We keep the files not only in drop zone but also in the bronze layer. So we try to keep the bronze layer in the same format as we receive the data. Let's see a demonstration about file triggers and drop zone in Microsoft Fabric environment. Here I have a lakehouse. In this lakehouse, in the files area of the lakehouse, I have a folder called drop zone. This will be our drop zone for files. we will need to process the files immediately as they arrive in this folder. How will we process the files? I have a notebook here to process the files. This is the notebook to process the files. I didn't develop too much the notebook. The notebook is making something very simple. I basically read the content of the entire drop zone, of all the files in the drop zone, append this content to a table called products2 table, and then I delete all the files in the folder drop zone. Once I completed the processing, I delete all the files. Is deleting a good idea? Not really, not always a good idea. Most of time it would be better to move these files to a different place, which would be the bronze layer. Most of the times it would be better to move these files to the bronze layer than deleting them. So we keep the data in the original format as we receive it. Let's take a look on the lakehouse. Here I have the lakehouse. Let's make a select on my table, products2. So I'll be making this select on the table, products2, counting the records just to confirm the amount of records I have at the moment. And here it is, the result. We have 150 records inside this table. Now let's create a trigger which will identify the arrival of new files in that folder and trigger the notebook. Let's go to the real-time hub. In the real-time hub, I'll look to Fabric events. I want to make a trigger over Fabric events. I want to make a trigger over OneLake. When files arrive in OneLake. OneLake events. I have all these possible file events to capture. Let's set an alert. In the source, I need to specify exactly which events I want to capture. It by default comes selected with all events, all 6 events. I only want one, the file created. At the source in OneLake, so I specify the source of the event, it will be my lakehouse, my lake. Next, it asks me to specify where I would like to capture the events from. I will select the folder drop zone. This folder drop zone is where I want to capture the events. Next, and save. The capture will happen on each event which happens in that folder. I will run a Fabric item, which item? A notebook, my notebook inside the Delta Lake workspace. I'll choose the notebook, ingest files. And this alert needs to be saved somewhere. Okay, I'll save this alert on the same workspace, Delta Lake. I'll create a new item. I'll call my drop zone trigger. Create. So the alert is created. It tells me the alert is created. In fact, this alert created is a data activator object. Let's take a look on the workspace, make a refresh on the workspace, and we'll see the data activator object present here. Here it is, my data activator object. That's great. Let's take a look on it. Until this moment, no event has happened. Nothing has happened. Let me go to the lakehouse and I will upload the file. Upload files. And here are 2 files that I can upload. Let's upload products A. And let's mind that the ID of one of the products is 935. Open, upload. Okay, this file is being uploaded to the drop zone. It's done. The file is there. Let's take a look again on our data activator. The data activator takes some moments, sometimes some minutes to identify an event. The data activator has some delay in relation to the event itself. Until now, it has not identified the event yet. Let's wait a bit more. And here it is. In the live feed of the data activator, the event was identified, and we can note here how it identified the file that I uploaded to this folder, the file products A. In fact, if I return now to the lakehouse, the drop zone is empty. Why the drop zone is empty? Because my notebook drops the file, remove the files from the drop zone. I can take a look on the lakehouse itself and select the product ID 935. There it is. Now I have the product ID 935 together the products. Let's check the total of products. It's now 168. Immediately as I upload the file, the data activator triggered the execution of the notebook and my file was processed. Let's try again a second time. Let's go to OneLake, upload a second file, upload files, and products B. 717 is the ID of one of the products. Upload. So the file is uploaded to the lakehouse. Let's take a look on the data activator. And there it is. The data activator identified the second file uploaded. Let's take a look on the lakehouse. Let's make a refresh of this page. And the drop zone is empty again. Let's query 717. And there is the new product record. Let's check the total. And I have a total of 186 files. In this way, we just saw how we can trigger an activity like a notebook execution from a file upload. One limitation that we have in relation to this is the fact that we can't pass parameters to the notebook execution. So the notebook doesn't know exactly the file name which was uploaded and which triggered the notebook execution. This is a limitation, but not a so huge limitation. It will only create a problem in more complex scenarios, way more complex scenarios. For a drop zone, it's enough and it works well as in this example. Thank you very much for watching and see you next week.